So this is preparing dissertation prospectus?
This is it's a proposal perspectives class. We call it a proposal, but it's not full proposal, and it's really more than a prospectus. So they're coming out here with on the way to proposal. On the way, it's dissertation proposal preparation, and yeah. So we are in week 8 of R795. Sorry to miss you all last week, but here we are to catch up on things. We have 2 weeks and then we have a spring break. Some of you still have task 3 to turn in to me, and that's fine. Task 3 had not your analysis plan, your research design and sampling plan. And then the analysis plan is due March 21st after spring break, or a few days after with the grace period. Any comments or questions for me? Okay. There are a number of people who are missing from this week. Next week, I'm going to propose, before we move to Vanessa, next week I'm going to propose, I need to put my video on, where did I forget that? Hello, everybody. I thought I had my video on. That's what we're saying. This is a day. So next week, I'd like to meet face-to-face, and then we have spring break, and then another face-to-face for those of you in Bloomington who miss meeting face-to-face. So I'm going to recommend that we meet in the School of Ed in one of the 2 classrooms of which I have a key that nobody knows about. And don't tell anybody. They're good rooms, 2140 and 2101. I'm sure Vanessa took a couple classes in one, or 2101 didn't exist as a classroom when she was there. It's a remodeled room. 2140, she may have. And I'd like to know, and the people remotely will stream it in Zoom. So Hejong, I will send you an email. Tina, I'll send you an email. See if you can find a time next Tuesday night or Wednesday night or afternoon or something we can meet face to face. So I'll do that after class in a doodle. Vanessa. Vanessa Dennen is with us, who was a grad student in IST a little more than a quarter century ago. She started back in 1996, Vanessa, or was it 97?
I think it was 7.
She infamously took a class with me on emerging learning technologies and e-learning in 1997 in the fall. And she sat in the hallway waiting for the class to start, and she didn't realize I was in the room because I had curly long hair and a beard the week before, and I got the beard shaved off and my hair was nothing. There was only 1 inch left. I told the barber, the haircut lady, to cut 3/4 of an inch, and she left 3/4 of an inch. And after I saw that I was a different person, I decided to shave the beard and come to class, and no one knew who I was. It was kind of fun to play on guess my identity for that week. Around that time, Vanessa and I decided to do conferences together. And so we presented at numerous conferences, many of them in the corporate training sector, that were struggling with how to evaluate e-learning, assess e-learning, how to engage learners in online environments. In particular, the role of the online moderator, which was Vanessa's dissertation. She was one of the first to look at online moderation and all the nuances thereof. When she gave a talk at a conference one day in Wisconsin, it was in 2001 or so, and I said, no one's going to come to this session, Vanessa. It's just passé. People know by now what to do. And so this is like 4 or 5 years after the great unveiling of e-learning in 1997. So it might have been 2002. And we're sitting in a room. It's a big room, but there are only like 30 chairs in the room. And I said, no one's going to come. There's not going to be. And the previous years, we literally had 100 people every workshop that we did in Wisconsin, which we did with Hawaiian shirts on most of the time. I need to make Sunmei a co-host. And lo and behold, there you are, co-host Sunmei. We have Paula, who's joining us from Canada, from New Brunswick or something like that. So, and Paul is one who had a proposal for our special issue on disadvantaged populations and micro-credentials. That Vanessa may remember that. And so with other people that we know. And so all of a sudden the session started and people were packing that room and they were bringing chairs into the room and they're taking notes on everything she had to say. And I'm like, what the heck? Don't people know how to moderate in online environments? And certainly they did not. And she was the most popular session of the entire conference, I think. I interviewed some of the folks in the back with me. They were medical doctors and other, other disciplines. So since that time, Vanessa and I have worked on a couple of theoretical pieces, quite a few different theoretical pieces. We've not done books together, but she has done books, one on social media. And she's done a MOOC, and I may have did you turn the MOOC into a book, the MOOC project, or not? No.
No, but we published on it. Then there was data from it, but we also published about the process of designing and developing.
Right. So, all things e-learning and virtual learning and online moderation and emerging learning technologies, Web 2.0 for a while that was called. We don't use that terminology anymore. And social media in particular. If you're in my R678 class last spring, she popped in and took someone's place who was sick one day. And I asked her to pop in today, not to take someone's place. But the last 2 semesters, I've had Florence Martin talk about systematic reviews of the research. And Florence, Vanessa, and I have done 2 special issues on systematic reviews of the research in educational technology and meta-analyses and so forth. She's recently become an endowed chair, or I don't know, it's a distinguished professorship or an endowed chair. It's kind of both.
It's funny how those things work together, right? Because there's an endowment that pays for it, but the title is distinguished professor.
So she's got a 2 feet, 1 foot in one camp, one another one. She's both. And I won't say that I'm jealous, but I am. I'm very proud of her to assume the leadership in the field. And there are a few alums in IST who have done the same. Brian Beatty out in the West Coast of San Francisco created the high flex model. Charles Graham did the handbook of blended learning with me out at BYU, and Vanessa. And there are a few others sprinkled around the country who during the past quarter century have risen to the top people in the field that people read and look to and go to for advice and support and so forth. She's at a growing program at Florida State and is right, I think, the program chair for the online masters, maybe the online doctorate as well. Not anymore.
Overall program coordinator and academic director for the online EDD.
So I better stop before I keep making more and more mistakes. But it's been a pleasure working with her, chatting with her. I seek her advice on many topics that come up because she's got a good pulse on where the field is and where it's going and who to work with and where to publish in. And she's the editor, or one of 2 editors of the Internet in Higher Education, one of the top tier journals, might be then like number 3 or 4 in the field. And she'll probably interrupt and say, no, it's number 2. It's up there really high anyhow. And so she's been doing that for maybe a decade or so. And that puts her in high prominence as well. We've got a special issue of Online Learning Journal coming out next week, I think, and that will be free for anyone to read. It's about it's Online Learning Journal about online learning in general. So different pieces there. I'll talk about that in a little bit. What I think we'll do is we'll do 10 or 15 minutes of Q&A for Vanessa. Then we'll do about a half hour. We'll present on systematic reviews of the research and meta-analyses. And then we'll end with more Q&A for Vanessa. So I'm going to stop for a second, let Vanessa fill in a few gaps before we just open up for Q&A from all of you and get anything you really want to have addressed. You can ask her anything. This is like an AMA, Ask Me Anything session. But an AVA, Ask Vanessa Anything session. It can be about what's it like living in Florida? What's Florida State's curriculum? How is it different from IST? And any topic is fair game. She'd be happy to answer them for you. We've got a Jamboard put up by Sunmei, so feel free to put them in there. Vanessa, why don't you fill in the rough edges that I missed?
I don't know what edges to fill in. You've been pretty comprehensive in your overview. I was thinking as you were talking about the early online learning stuff that about how when I started my first faculty position was at San Diego State, and I was having a conversation with Allison Rossett. And if you don't know her, she's a pretty big name for performance improvement type work. She was one of the senior faculty, and she said to me, let's see if I can channel a little Allison here. She said, so Vanessa, you're doing this online discussion stuff, and that's what's now, but what's next? What are you going to do when that's not the thing anymore? That's not going to sustain your whole career. And well, kind of has. It kind of will. It's amazing how that has happened. And I think it's one of the challenges as a, excuse me, as a scholar, though, to tap into something that grows with you. So maybe it's an appropriate thing to talk about in a class like this where you're working on developing your dissertations. You don't hop a trend. Find the thread underneath it that is the topic that's going to grow with you and grow with the field.
So I will add to that. I had lunch once with Marty Siegel, who used to be an IST professor and moved to informatics. And he looked at me with the same eyes that you heard from Allison Rossett and said, that online learning stuff, it's hot now, but it's going to go away. Eventually, what are you going to do with the rest of your life after it dies down? You know, online learning goes away, in effect. But it sort of has kind of calmed down. I'm no longer doing 100 talks a year, more like 30, but still enough. You know, it's still plenty. Allison Rossett was a guest in R511 a year and a half ago. I have the video recording. I'll go look up the link to that while we're chatting and post it in the chat window if you'd like to hear Allison's views. Vanessa also forgot to mention she shuffled off to Buffalo and was a visiting professor or visiting lecturer at University of Buffalo. Is that right?
Yeah, I was a visiting assistant professor there for a year while I worked on my dissertation.
So she's had some experiences north, west, south, and central because she went to Northwestern University for a bit. And so she knows what's going on in the field. She has a pulse of what's going on in the field. Would someone like to ask her a question? Yeah, would someone like to ask her a question? And I'll look at the Jamboard and see if anyone's posted a question, but not yet. I'll go to Yua in Chicago, working at Baylor in Texas. Yua, she's sitting in. She took the class last semester. What's pressing you right now with your dissertation that's troubling you?
I'm not motivated to do it, but not my dissertation question. I do have a question regarding the ChatGPT. I know we're talking about the Web 2.0 tools before, but I just kind of want to get your opinion you know, how ChatGPT, you know, influence the instructional design field. I've been testing some features over there. Some of the answers are pretty amazing to me, I feel like.
Before you answer, Vanessa, I will say we had Donald Clark last night in R511. I'll post that in the chat window. 2.5 hours talking about ChatGPT and AI in general. So you will get that. I would like Vanessa, though, to answer her first question first. So what do students do? What do you advise students who don't feel motivated to work on their dissertation or might be late on their assignments? I won't name any names. What advice do you give your students to remotivate themselves before you answer the other one?
I think it's important to explore the source of your lack of motivation to try to figure out, you know, what it is, because sometimes putting a name on it can help you move forward. And I have seen over the years, I have seen students whose motivation has waned for so many reasons, right? Sometimes it's because they don't love their topic anymore. Sometimes it's because they're, and this is a very real one, I see it fairly often. It's a fear of graduation because there's uncertainty that's coming when you finish, and what is that going to mean? And as uncomfortable as graduate school can be at times, it becomes a comfortable sort of discomfort. Like, you know what it is, it's predictable, and you can just sit in it for a good long time. So moving moving forward to the next stage could be the thing that you worry about. Or, some people worry about perfection and getting it right and don't want to hand anything off to an advisor. So, why bother trying, because you don't know how to get it right. And I think once you can start to label the source of what's holding you back, you can start to have some productive conversations. Ideally, you have an advisor who's somebody you can talk to about this, or maybe, hopefully the lines of communication are good like that. I like to talk about these things with my students, because then I can point things out to them, like, yeah, it is scary. I agree with you. It's scary to graduate and to not know what your job is going to be. But if I told you were going to sit in this spot for the rest of your life, do you really want to do this? No. So it's scary, but it's exciting. Let's talk about what steps we can also do in parallel to the dissertation that will help us move forward on planning where your future is going to go. Or, if the lack of motivation is some fear based on perfectionism, then I love to remind people that a dissertation, it's just one project that you're going to do in your life, one project among many. And it would be unreasonable to expect that you could do it entirely on your own with no feedback and revision, and just get it perfect. First, nothing you've ever seen published is perfect, ever, 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 ever. There's something called the tenacious typo. Like, despite the fact that 1 million people have read this and checked over it, there's always a typo in it by the time that it's gone published. And there's, always something that you look back 5 years later and find a little bit cringy. And that's on published stuff. And published stuff has gone through peer review or editorial review. I mean, people have looked over it, and copy editors have looked over it. And it's still, so, like, why hold yourself to some standard that nobody else holds themselves to? And so those are the kinds of things that I like to explore with people for lack of motivation. Sometimes it's too big. So if it's too big, then we talk about how we break it down into smaller pieces, and also how to treat yourself, like either finding little rituals or little rewards that you can give yourself for getting smaller chunks of work done, because sometimes it's just too big. If you look all the way out to the distance, you're not going to get it done. So, and those are just some of the things I do when I'm working with my students, trying to figure out why they are failing to progress.
Vanessa, I was having dinner with the former dean at Minnesota State, who's on our board, and I gave her my World is Open book, and she passed it on to her husband, who read it at dinner and found a typo. It's 10 years old. I mean, it's my, in the World is Open book of all places. And my favorite calendar, my calendar project, I found a word out of place in that one too. So, it happens. It happens. So
Nothing is perfect. But that's kind of the beauty of the world too, that we're all human. We're all fallible.
So I guess what she's advising is, don't get a perfectionist as an advisor. Avoid those people, Now,
they're not perfectionists. They're just people who try to hold high standards.
Yeah, very high standards.
But you can also let them know that you fear the standards, or you need help figuring out how to meet the standards. It's always better to have that conversation than to sit there and just stew in it and try to figure out how you're going to get there. That's not a good position to be in. So
can you answer her ChatGPT question, or AI in general?
Oh, goodness. That's what everybody's talking about right now, isn't it?
Yeah.
And you said when you were asking about it, like, you were looking at it and some of the stuff is quite good. And yeah, it is. But you know what? Some of it also isn't good. So I think we're still at a point where, we're not, it's not there. It's not there at a level that we can reliably lean on it or talk about it fully replacing people yet. My husband is a history professor, and he's got a student in his class who he's quite convinced is using ChatGPT for his assignments, but he can't prove it. But he said that it's part of it is like just the bizarre mediocrity of the writing that he's getting from this student. That, you know, it might start out like sounding really good in the first two sentences, but then it just gets weirdly redundant. But of course, it will get better. It will continue to get better. And the one thing I always feel that with the new technology, whatever it is, whenever it comes out, is that we need to think about how we want to be in control of it, which is a little bit of a different perspective. Not all of the wonderful things that it can do for us, but how do we use it for good? I don't have the answer to that yet. I'm watching a lot of people jump over to that as a trend, and I'm just like, whatever. I've got my research, I've got my questions. That was the thing, is what I found to study early on was something that really has sustained me throughout my career and continued to fascinate me. So I'm not too interested in the ChatGPT trend, actually.
I am starting a study on it of YouTubers who are teaching language online. So my language learning, people like Shajin Ko, who was in grad school when you were finishing. She's still here. You know Shajin from a project we were on, the ITT Tech project. She was on with you. But anyways, be that as may, watch the Donald Clark, the second half, maybe he drops out for 10 minutes, his internet goes, but he comes back. And in the last half, he answers that question repeatedly. It's not just once, he'll answer it repeatedly, because they had many versions of that question or percolating up, you know, the trustability, how do you get students to understand, you know, how to filter out the noise, and that it's not, you know, it can be flawed, all these issues that exist out there. I guess the number one takeaway is it's a supplement, it's a resource, it's a supplemental tool, just like a calculator is a supplemental tool, right? It's a little more than a calculator because it actually gives you text, but it's not original text, it's not creative text. So, you know, we have to consider that as well. And we could go on and on about ChatGPT, and I've collected 30, if you want, I've got a Dropbox link to about 30 readable news articles from the end of 2022 and in 2023. I can send you that if you're interested. And also, yeah, well, anyways, so we should go to Paula. Paula, you kind of indirectly know Vanessa. Would you like to say hi?
Hi, good day, Dr. Dennen. How are you? I have no questions at the moment from me as yet. So, but as you go on, I would think of something to ask. Thank you.
Tina was the first one in. Tina's working at Crane, which is a naval weapons base, you know, this large place, and she's running the maker lab for kids off site, I guess you would say, right? Is it in Crane or is it outside of Crane base?
Yeah, it's outside of Crane, and it's their K through 12 STEM outreach. So the Navy defines STEM as K through PhD, and I have K through 12, and then we have another person who's in charge of university outreach, and then we have another person who's in charge of just Indiana University, and then we have another person who's in charge of just Purdue University. So it's kind of a big deal doing the STEM outreach and stuff. So I guess
so she's really close to
Oh, go ahead.
Bloomington. She's in Greene County. Vanessa, where did you live when you
Right.
lived in Bloomington? About where did you live?
The first place I lived was like some apartment that was not too far from Lenny's.
Okay.
And then I moved on the other side of town. I feel like I was not too far from a Walmart. I only vaguely remember it.
So you go to the Walmart and you keep going and you'll get to where Tina is. You keep on that road for about 10 more miles, and that's just get your brain situated. That's where she is. She's, you know, relatively close to us.
Yeah, about 45 minutes.
Yeah.
Ish.
Yep.
Yeah.
So you have any issues in general, or any specific things about the makerspace that you'd like to ask Vanessa?
So I guess maybe it's not the makerspace thing. Right now and maybe this will be addressed later, is just I guess lit reviews are starting to get to be like a issue for me, like trying to like systematically, like the systematic part I think is giving me trouble. And maybe it's my monkey brain, ADHD brain. It's hard for me to like keep on a path without going, squirrel and and going somewhere else, and really making sure that I'm systematic and knowing when am I done? Like how do I know I'm done?
Yeah, so this is for your dissertation lit review?
Yeah, like really it's for my day 2 quals question, but essentially that is to get you on the jump start to your dissertation. And yeah, it is.
It's a great question.
So our EDD students some of them are taking quals while they're in this class. Our PhDs have pretty much passed their quals. So we have 5 PhDs in the class and 4 EDDs in the class. And last semester was the opposite. We had almost everyone was an EDD, and we're using this class to help prepare for quals and pass the quals and stuff like that too. Yeah.
Got it. And I think it's a great question because yeah, I hear you. I could follow the shiny objects for a while. There's always something that's fascinating that shows up. But at some point we need to be done. And how do we know when we're done? I feel like it's a process where you have to read broadly and then you have to rein it in. Sometimes it's hard to tell when you're done yourself. Sometimes you need somebody else to tell you that you are done. I think that's part of the learning process. I find I often have to tell my students, like, stop now. And I put a pause on it, and I will push them to some other activity. So like when they're writing the first 3 chapters of their dissertation, they write the lit review, and a bunch of them will want to start with that because they know they need to immerse themselves in the literature so that they understand that they can start to develop that conceptual framework, that problem space that their dissertation sits in. But as they read, there's more to read and more to read, and suddenly there's so much of it and they don't know what to put into chapter 2 and what to not put into chapter 2. And so sometimes I say, let's stop. You know what you're studying now, but let's move on. Let's move to another section. And I find that's been really helpful, that after thinking through chapter 1 and chapter 3 and figuring out, well, what's the problem space and how am I going to study it? Then we can have this conversation about how do we connect the dots between the 2 of them and come up with an outline that's going to work for your literature review. And then once we have an outline, everything that you read, you can start to, first put in all the stuff that you have that's relevant. Right? Just because you read it doesn't mean it has to go in. And then we start to look at it and say, and where are the holes? What are the areas that have not yet been investigated, and identify those, and those are the spots to go to. And then I also ask them all to get a notebook and put a folder on their computer, and or they can do it in a OneNote file or something if they're all digital with the way that they do things. And I say in the folder, grab all the articles that looked interesting along the way but didn't relate to your topic and save them there. And then make notes for yourself about why you saved them. Just take a moment to jot down a bullet point or 2 about what was interesting about that article today. And that's a place they can always go back to for a source of inspiration in the future for new projects. With this recognition that the dissertation is just one project of your whole career, and that there's probably a reason why all these other things look good to you and looked interesting to you, because they're still in that larger sphere of interest, even like we were just talking about Chat GPT, and I've seen, seeing stuff coming up and it's not a key interest for me. So I'm like, yeah, whatever. I don't pay attention to that stuff. But today I was looking for a few things to help one of my students, and I found a couple of articles about the performativity of hashtags on social media. And I was just like, oh yes, these are great. I don't have time for them right now. They don't fit the project that I was doing, but I saved them and put them somewhere. And so on a day when I've scheduled some time just to dream a little dream and think about what I'm going to do, they're there and I'll go explore them. So that's something you can do with all of your shiny objects. Just put them somewhere and know that you've got them and you'll find them again.
Squirrels can find the nuts eventually when they're hungry enough.
Yeah.
You can be we're squirrels all the time. I will say that next week, our guest, Merve Bazdigan, my former advisee, will talk about 10 tips for literature reviews and 10 tips on forming research questions. So we'll address that. So bring that question back. We'll hopefully have her face-to-face. Some of you will be watching remotely, but she lives close enough to campus. We can both get to campus and have a face-to-face session, or a mixed or a blend or something like that. Who else? Sunmei is my TA. She's dissertating, collecting data, analyzing data, hoping to defend in a couple of months. Do you have any questions, Sunmei? She's out working with Paul Kim. She had worked on the Smile project with Paul, and she's also worked on Todo Math, a math application game for kids out in Berkeley. And she lives in Palo Alto, working at Stanford on mobile apps. So Sunmei.
Yeah, hi, nice to meet you, and thank you for coming. So just I'm listening to you, but actually my internet is not stable, so I turn off. Actually, I'm working on dissertation, and then I faced a lot of problem. That's because, it's really different to, from what I worked on the paper before. Usually really short, but this one is really long. And then sometimes, I don't know, that's because, I can't find any time for focus, usually it's really hard. It's usually after, my children went to sleep, right? Everything is done and then I can focus. But nowadays, they went to sleep really late and then I have to support them. So after, 12, and then I have to wake up 4 or 5 a.m. nowadays. So it's really hard to find the time, to focus for myself. So what about you? Do you have any, recommendation or experience that you did before?
And before you answer that, Sunmei needs to tell you what her dissertation is, because it's exactly the things that Vanessa would do. But let her answer first, then tell her about the dissertation topic. Vanessa?
Yeah.
So managing all the things, it's hard, isn't it? It's I understand. I didn't have all of that when I was doing my dissertation, but I have had all of that through my career. I've got a 14-year-old and a dog and a house. It all requires a lot of attention. In fact, like I just heard the beeps. My husband went out to pick up our daughter from dance right now, and how do you? So there are days when I feel like I'm not doing any of it very well, and that I'm torn in every direction. I think that's pretty normal. I think you at some point you have to decide what things are really important and how they all have to be done and what you can give up on, perhaps. Like, can you give up on how clean the house is, maybe? Or how perfect? It's that perfection thing, right? Like what of your perfection can you step back on? Or what can you outsource if you have the means to outsource it? In fact, on my mind today is that, so we've outsourced cleaning the house. The cleaning lady comes tomorrow. She comes every 2 weeks. And I can't say that we do a good job of keeping everything neat, at least not during the regular school year. The summer's a different story, but during the regular school year, it gets bad between times. And so tonight we will be up cleaning for the cleaning lady. But I feel like it's like moms coming to keep us in line, and that's a good thing. But that's a structure that we needed to, just get through life. And that's part of this, because if you're adding, doing this scholarship on top of having a family and having a job, and we can't magically make more hours in a day. You need to take time for yourself too. So be sure that you're all doing that. I think it's easy to get into really unhealthy spots where we just try to do everything for everybody else, and then we don't actually have the energy anymore. Like Curt, I know you run every day, so that's a fabulous thing for you. I was going to tell you, Curt, I have, so you know how I had injured my foot and got sidelined for a while. Did you know that I got a concussion at the end of ACT? Yeah. Okay, great. So like all of that, I decided it was going to change this year, and my schedule is crazy. I have fought for it so hard. I have worked out every single day this year, and I'm tracking it all on my Peloton app. And today, so it's the last day of February, right? Today, I got my gold medal for cycling for February. That's 150 miles cycled in February. I got it in January too, but there are fewer days in February, so I was worried about it. And I hit 3,000 minutes of working out for this year. So that's my bit. And but I realized with that is kind of what you're talking about, like fighting for the time and triaging everything else to, know what stuff is going to be important. I have to fight for my writing time too. Workout time, writing time, it's hard because everything else will try to grab some. I've got to fight for time with my kid. I'm looking forward to spring break because I'm going to spend some quality time with her. She's busy and I'm busy. What do we do? I don't know. What have we done in this, contemporary life? We've overscheduled ourselves.
And
That's
now
great. Yeah.
with 50,000 journals all asking you to review papers for them, what do you say?
But I think that it's also important, if you're going to enter this field, to not get too hung up in trying to compare yourself to other people and what their accomplishments have been. It's certain kinds of accomplishments, they don't make people better, they don't make people worse. We all have to construct our own lives in ways that are satisfactory for us personally. And so if you keep that in mind and you're able to be in touch with what you value as a person, both in your scholarly life, but I think in the rest of your life too, then you can make choices. And it doesn't mean that sometimes you don't feel a little bit of that envy or something when you find out that oh, somebody got this or somebody got that. But then you take a step back and say, okay, that would be nice to have, but what would it take to make that happen? And do I really do I want to do that? And I think about this every year, could I publish 4 or 5 more articles in a year? Well, I think I'm probably capable of it, but something would have to give. What would have to give? And what would happen if that thing gave? And I'm not sure that I like that. So that I say okay, maybe I'm actually pretty happy with the output level that I have. Maybe it's working for me.
So Sune, tell her what you're studying, because I think she'll be fascinated by it.
Yeah, right now I'm working on actually analyze the peer interaction using discussion board. So actually I combine the 3 instructional strategies. So small group and rule-based and guided instruction. So I tested, performed the experiment with the one of Bonk's class, last semester. So I collected 3 different data. The first one is online survey. The other one is discussion post, and third one is interview. So right now I'm working on that. So they are really great. And then actually, I think that data are really good, but only problem is that a lot than I expected. That's because the discussion post right now is over 1,000 posts. And then I interview 14 people. So yeah, so they are a lot. So I really wanted to extract more that's the problem, I think, the first time, oh, I did it that point, right? And then I realized that there are more, that's because I talk to more people and then they share more opinion from them. So that's another problem. So that's the reason I extended it to, actually my day.
So any
Anyway.
advice on that? But she didn't tell you the key thing. She skimmed over it, kind of. She's studying online role play. So tell Vanessa what roles they took on and how you did the role play, how you changed it up.
For me?
Yeah.
So actually, I used the 4 roles, the moderator and supporter, challenger, and summarizer. But actually, based on the more roles, so at that time, actually, I, combine the multiple roles into the one role. So for example, summarizer always just summarize the whole, entire discussion. But at that time, I added one more role so they can bring the new resources, something like that. So actually, that one is not just that name. So actually, it's a kind of, elaborated role. So I did. And then actually I provided detailed information about each role. So what you should do for this role, something like that. So every time, yeah. So, and then I gave some example, how to, upload the post as a moderator or summarizer and other role. Yeah.
So I guess her question is, how do you deal with all the data? And all my students are going to be dealing with that. How do you deal with the inundation of data, make selections as to what to study in your dissertation? What do you want to pull out? What's important?
Alignment with the research questions. You have to recognize that any data set, I mean, hopefully you've gone into your data collection thinking about hopefully you go into your interviews asking the questions that are well aligned with your research questions. But at the same time, you're going to learn more, right? Because people talk about all sorts of things in interviews. And you may be collecting all of the discussion posts because you have a research question that wants you to look at a very specific thing. So in this case, I'm guessing it has something to do with did they play the roles that they were supposed to play, or how well did they do that, or what did that do to the nature of the interactions that have, there are lots of questions you could formulate about that, and there are a lot of other questions that you could have about what's happening in the discussion in general. So the key is it's kind of like that shiny object thing as well, or the squirrels with the nuts. Like you've got to figure out what's the alignment, what is the research question, and keep everything that you do right now in alignment with that so that you can complete the dissertation. But if you have other ideas about how to analyze the data or other stories that are in the data, write them down in your notebook and come back to it later. So you don't have to mine the data set for everything that's in it for your dissertation. You just have to answer your research questions. It's all a matter of what your research questions are and how you scope them.
We'll go on to Barbara. Thank you, Sunmei. Barbara,
Thank you so much.
Any comments or questions? Barbara's in South Bend as a professor up there.
Not a whole lot. I mean, I'm just kind of in that same idea as Tina is, where I'm looking around at different articles and interests, and there's just so much stuff, and just trying to focus it on what's really pertinent and important, but not missing something that's an important piece to consider, or think that there's not something out there that can be addressed, and in fact there might be, and I just didn't know how to search it the right way.
Do you have a research question yet?
Yeah, I'm looking at active learning in the medical laboratory science profession, and how I want to look at how faculty develop active learning techniques. And sorry, my husband. Hey, hold on one second. Sorry, my husband turned the TV on in the other room. I'm looking at how faculty try to develop active learning techniques and making them as authentic as possible before students go out to doing clinicals and actually working in the field. So That's what I
Yeah,
wanna-
it's such an iterative process, and it kind of expands and contracts at points, which does make the process difficult. I don't think it's a bad thing to, if you're worried about it, to outright ask your advisor, like, do you think I'm at a stopping point? Or,
Yeah,
like,
it's-
here's the
I'm
bodies
with-
of literature I've read, and let's talk about this. And do I really need to get more, or no, not so much?
Yeah, I'm at the same point with Tina right now, just trying to put together the answers for my committee question for calls. So, and we
You
have
have
a
to
day.
work independently on that, or are you allowed to get any
Yeah.
feedback on it?
It's pretty independent.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, and then we have a date. It's due the 17th of March, so we got to get it done by a certain time. So
17, 18 days from now. So that's
I
what they're,
know I've got like 60 articles in front of me, and I know they're not all going to be important. But now I'm trying to sort through them all and figure out what I really want to focus on and not. So
yeah.
Barbara, I've taken the stance that, there's only so much that we can get done and like 3 weeks. So, we're probably not gonna create the Taj Mahal in 3 weeks. So
Well,
let's just
and we have a word limit. I mean, I get it. So just trying to figure out how to take, a 6-7 page article and condense it down into, 2 sentences, and there you go.
It's a 4,000 word limit. It used to be 2,500 till some stupid professor named Bonk told it can be 3,000. No, it can be 3,500. How about 4,000? Oh yeah, that's a good number. So it kept going up because really you couldn't say a whole lot in 2,500 words. You barely
no.
got to the abstract. So if Barbara had said she didn't have a research question, I'd have to task 1 or 2 because those have research questions in them. At least those I think they are. So yeah, so that's where people are at. We haven't heard from Hejong, who's a PhD student, just passed her quals, her dossier 2, we call it, in late January, so a month ago, and she was in the Taj Mahal in her mind for the last month. Now she's got to get back to thinking about her dissertation. So Hejong, you want to where you're at?
Yeah, thank you for introducing me. Yeah, I just passed qual exam last January, and I'm now in the stage of dissertation. So I'm thinking about my topic and other stuff. And when it comes to literature review, not only a literature review section in the dissertation or in the article as a part, I'm also thinking about standalone literature review. And when we conduct systematic literature review, I'm always curious what the best way to select the inclusion and exclusion criteria. I'm always struggling with inclusion criteria because that is a very important piece when conducting systematic literature review. So do you have suggestion how we pick best inclusion or exclusion criteria?
Yeah, I mean, I think that we can consider the inclusion and exclusion criteria and the decision about that to be, that's more of a procedural challenge for it. But so before that, I would say there's a framing challenge, and that's the one that I think a lot of people neglect, is that they jump into it and say like, oh, and often like, for some other purpose, for other research that I'm doing, I need to do a lit review, just, like the kind of lit review that you do just to set up your conceptual framework.
Yes, for me, the easiest way for first framing is year, like I'm gonna do like within 10 years or 20 years or 5 years. Yeah, those kind of things. Yeah, year. What else do we
framing
need
is bigger than that though. But what I'm talking about by framing is like actually figuring out what the research questions are that you're going to ask of your data in the systematic review. And I think that it helps if we think about the systematic review in that way. There's been a challenge. So we've got empirical research over here, right? And we all talk about like studies where I'm going to go out and I'm going to interact with human participants and collect data to answer research questions. And then we have these thoughts of literature review, which often is I went to the literature so that I could build out the conceptual framework that then supports this study over here, and I write it all together in the same document, whether that's a dissertation where you devote an entire chapter to it, or if it's a journal article where you're trying to figure out how much of your precious 8,000 words you're going to devote to the literature review, because you also really want to showcase what you found in your study. But between these two, in a sense, is that systematic review. But I'd say the systematic review, it helps if we think about the systematic literature review, not so much the way we think about literature reviews, but if we think about it more closer to an empirical study, where we then start to say we need to have research questions for this. And then we've got data collection, and when the inclusion and exclusion criteria are part of our sampling process. And then the data analysis tells us what to do with it. What I've seen happen all too often, and as a journal editor, I see a lot of, I reject a lot of these systematic reviews where people just start with like, oh, I'm going to do a study on something. So while I'm getting literature for that, hey, why not do a systematic review? I'll plop in a few search terms. And it's that same problem you're talking about, like, I don't know, 10 years, 20 years, what am I going to bound this by? And then they just describe what they, like, I did a literature search and then I'm going to describe what was in that search, but that's not really transformative, right? Anybody else could sit down and put in the same search terms and basically see the same thing that you're seeing. So you need to take it to that next level. You need to come up with some sort of critical question that makes doing a review worthwhile. The question itself needs to be situated in the prior research of the field. You think about, if you're asking things about years, you think about how mature that field is so far. How far back does it go? Are there particular turning points in it, perhaps, that might help me decide that, like, oh, I want to go from this point forward? Is it so, if it's so vast that, like, doing the totality of your topic, and I say that because, often in our field, we can kind of trace something back to the origins, especially when we're talking about stuff with online technologies. If we trace back to that point, do we get so much in response that it's unwieldy and we can't really go through it? Well, if that's the case, we probably don't have a really good question that we're trying to ask of the literature. So it goes back to that question in the beginning. If you have good research questions for your lit review, it really should help you set up appropriate inclusion and exclusion criteria.
Hey, John?
Yeah, right. Thank you. Yeah,
I think maybe
you're
the
right.
next,
Yeah, research question is very important. I think that is very critical. Yeah, usually if I have a very specific, very narrowed, specific research question, the criteria, inclusion criteria is not that difficult. I think, for example, if I want to go through the trend of AI education, especially NLP education, natural language processing education for elementary education, maybe there are not many literature in the journals. However, if I want to just if my research cast is a very general AI education or computer science education generally, maybe I need some inclusion criteria. So yeah, it really depends on the research question.
But you have to think about it also. I mean, that with that research question, really, what is the purpose of this? What are you trying? When you talk about, like, in an area where there's just a few articles that are written, then perhaps it's premature to do a literature review and to do a systematic literature review in that area if there's just a tiny bit of research that has been done. I mean, there's a special kind of review called the scoping review, where you go in and you are trying to figure out what has been done so far, kind of map the pieces of research that have been done. And that's usually done when there's not a lot in an area and you're trying to figure out where the holes are and where the connectors might be. And so then, the purpose of that is to really illuminate the areas that more research might be needed. But we can also be asking some, really targeted questions about this, to like what is known about this so far, and and how solid is that? I think that it's sometimes easier to understand it when you think about medical research, and there's a lot of systematic review work and scoping review work that comes out of the medical field. And for them, it's quite necessary because the stakes, of course, are much higher than they are for us when you're talking about medical issues. Right? If you watch the news on any given day, you will start to hear that they report on studies that drink red wine every day, live 5 years longer. Drinking will kill you 5 years earlier. And we have to reconcile with all of these things. And so in the medical profession, systematic reviews of the literature bring all of this together so that we can see all of these different studies and the conditions under which they were conducted, and start to make some informed decisions, both in practice about what we might do on the basis of these studies, because you should never listen to a single study that tells you this or that. It's through the accumulation of studies that either consistently demonstrate the same thing or provide points of just confirmation that show that there are some other variables at play. It's through that we really get better at making decisions about what we're going to do in practice. But it also helps us realize how do we do this research better? How do we fill in with other questions that we could be answering? The other thing that the medical field will do, though, is that scoping review part, where they're just trying to figure out what's there, and they do it very, very quickly. For that, I'd liken that to the beginning of the pandemic, and there was research that's being done, and the research is coming out so rapidly, and nobody knows what's going on and what to do with it. So, pause, wait a minute, we got to bring this together even as it's happening, and start to map out the field so that all of these people who are doing work in this area are able to see where it's going and build on each other's work as smoothly and as quickly as possible, because that practitioners can be informed by this synthetic overview of the work as it is happening, because we didn't have time, and when the pandemic began, to sit back and say, let's let the researchers go look at that for 4 or 5 years, publish some stuff, and then we'll come to a systematic review of the first 5 years of COVID-19 related research to find out the efficacy of different treatment paths. That didn't work when it was so confusing at the beginning of the pandemic. When you're hearing hey, this is a treatment that works, this is a treatment that's worked, this, maybe this, that's because all of these individual research groups are trying different things and putting out their findings. And it's through these kinds of reviews that we can amass it all together and start to make sense of it. And sometimes we have to do it really quickly. Fortunately, in educational research, things move slowly, and we can usually wait and do a systematic review. And Curt, I see you brought up the slides to go right on into it.
So we Florence Martin was my guest last semester and the semester before, and she talked about systematic reviews, and she's writing a book on it. And I'll end with that slide of her book that she's working on. And I did a couple meta-analyses of the research with a former student named Min Young Do, and she and I got an ACT award. We're getting an AERA award for the research that we've done, and I'll talk about the study. I had to present it at ACT. And Vanessa's been in charge of our special issues, helped in 2 ETR&D and Online Learning Journal, which I mentioned. So she knows a lot about this. So I thought, since she's with us today, she could supplement and talk about, I'm going to hide my panel just so it's not blocking everything, hide video panel. So, there's, as Vanessa said, there's a lot of interest in all aspects of learning, design, and technology, in particular online learning and open education and distance learning is getting a lot of attention because of the pandemic, and it's going to continue to do so. So we need these reviews, these systematic reviews, shed light on what works, what doesn't work, what the research has said, where some gaps exist, what hasn't been studied. It kind of lets you know, or lets you get some sense of what's out there and what's been done. And systematic reviews examine, it's a secondary data. It's not primary data. It's an overview of existing primary data. So you have to find what's out there. You have to read it, synthesize it, and then make some decisions about, or analyses about what's out there. So, it's a methodology to locate articles, to select, to evaluate all the questions that Hye-Jung was asking, and many of you were asking about how do we select and decide on, and what are the criteria for doing a systematic review. Vanessa, you want to comment on that?
I actually want to differentiate a little bit between the systematic review and the dissertation
Right.
lit review. And hold on, I'm going to grab something off my bookshelf. This is what I use with my students, and I love this book, Reason and Rigor. Wait, is my camera being blurry about it? That's because all right, fine. Hold on, let me take my blur off. My office is a mess. That's why I had it on.
Aha. Home office or work office?
Home, it's the home office, and I've got like piles of stuff on the floor back there from different projects I was working on. So this book, Reason and Rigor. Those are the authors. And we use this book to think about conceptual frameworks and theoretical frameworks for our work. And the book frames it really nicely in that your conceptual framework is that body of literature that you're then situating your research problem and your research questions in. And that speaks to, for the dissertation, how you are mining through the literature and what you need and what you don't need. Whereas in the systematic review, the systematic review has its own set of questions that require, as a method to answer them, this synthesis of existing knowledge. So, I mean, when I look at that retrieving, synthesizing, and assessing part, I think, like the retrieving, that's your data collection, and synthesizing is your data analysis, and assessing, that's your interpretation of it. It's just that you're treating other articles as your data sources.
And let me point out the reference here is the introduction to the ETR&D special issue. The ETR&D special issue, we didn't do a normal introduction. We did a full boat introduction to all the articles in that issue, as well as commenting on the state of the field. That was a special issue on emerging learning technologies and environments, all the research thereof, including wearable technologies and mobile technologies and gaming and MOOCs and social media and other kinds of things. Then the same is true of the second special issue. Our introductory article is longer than most, and so I recommend that you read that one. It's freely to access. ETR made that article. The intro is free online, but you should get it through the library anyways. And so, this is a slide from Florence Martin, I think, unless it's Vanessa's slide, on the difference between doing a literature review and doing a systematic review. So she says a literature review does not require justification or specific search procedures. The paper determines the literature review. Our paper is about X, and here's what has been written about that topic. Whereas she says a systematic review is somewhat different, and Vanessa can jump in here wherever she wants, but it follows a protocol called PRISMA, which Vanessa knows a lot more than I do. It creates more of a sense of trust between the researchers because you followed and replicated the existing standards, I guess, or procedures in the field. For instance, this systematic review examines 24 peer-reviewed articles published for the past decade, 2009 to 2020, or 12 years, that examine cognitive presence in online courses. Vanessa, you want to jump in on anything?
No, but I would say the Prisma website, and there's a website for all of that.
Good point.
Somewhere.
Yeah.
Provides guidelines for all of this, and poking around on there if you're going to do a systematic review is a great thing to do. But if you are working on your dissertation lit review, let it go and just put it in the box with all the shiny objects for another day.
So you've already talked about difference between scoping review and systematic review. You want to just, given the slide here, you want to repeat what you've said?
Yeah, so that scoping review is really about just saying like, what's been done out here so that I can even figure out what it is and see what the research questions should be moving forward. Whereas a systematic review is sitting at a fairly stable point and saying, I have a query that I want to make of the body of literature that the body of research that is already out there. And so that's why I'm starting with the question, and then I'm using the literature as my data source for it.
And so there are advantages of the systematic reviews, because then other people know what you've done if you followed a standard protocol, right? And it's supposedly to minimize bias in your selection process. And it can be reproduced by others because you followed a set procedure. They could also have the same topic or a similar topic and be finding the same articles. So there's some validity, important validity aspects to that, and reproducibility and so forth. That's from Stratton, 2019. So we did a special issue of ETR&D, one of the top journals in the field. And there are, I think that special issue is kind of unique because we had a preface to it, or an introduction that David Wiley and I did, and we had a closing or a reflective piece at the end, kind of like a book. We kind of did it as a book. I was hoping it would be a book. We got a little bit of pushback of making it a book as well as a special issue, but it would have been nice. But I think it is a book, and most special issues really are. So that one had social media, and we had Fei Gao and as well as Vanessa doing pieces on social media, and we had massive open online courses. Meina Zhu and I, or no, it was Meina Zhu and Dr. Mimi Lee and Anissa Sari. We have an article on special ed, people in Canada. We have mobile learning, 2 game-based learning and gamification articles, 1 on adaptive learning, 1 on learning analytics. You want to add anything, Vanessa?
No, I think you've covered the special issue pretty well there.
Yeah, so this is the current one we're working on. Trends, we're trends
I
related
think it's
to
out
online
tomorrow,
learning.
Curt.
Is it not tomorrow? Tomorrow's March 1st. So they were giving us a hard time about getting the introductory piece done. That's why it's coming out tomorrow or the next day. This week it should be out, eh? So, we had trends in online learning during COVID-19, which I did with Meina Zhu and with Min Young Do. We have Vanessa's piece on intersubjectivity, which is listed second from the bottom. We have passive participation. One of her graduate student advisees, Heijun Chao, is that how you say it?
Hanjin Cui,
Hanjin Cui is
an assistant professor at Bowling Green State University.
Very important to point that out. And she'll be at AERA if anyone's going to AERA. She looked at passive participation in online collaboration, and Florence Martin looked at online collaboration as well. We have people looking at help-seeking behaviors in online environments. Again, underrepresented and minoritized learners in online learning research, which I'm sure Paula would be interested in reading, right, Paula?
Sure thing.
Yeah, and she's got a keen interest in getting, aspects of credentialing. And then we, of course, had Dirk. And how do you say Dirk's last name, Vanessa?
Ethan-Thaler.
Thank you. He'll be at AECT in the fall if you want to meet someone doing excellent research from Germany, looking at online assessments. And then we had the role of moderators in online learning from the University of Houston with Sarah McNeil and one of her students, Michael Elf, who's now a lecturer, faculty actually there. So it's a good special issue. We start, and both of them start with we had how many proposals? 48 on the first one, and I've pretty similar on the second one. Is that right?
Yeah. Let me tell you all though, this is something we've learned from editing this. I mean, and from doing them, it's a lot of work. It is a lot of work to do these reviews. So if you ever see a call for proposals for one, don't just think oh yeah, sure, I'll do one and dream it up and think and then we'll figure it out. It is so much more work than you anticipate. If you don't already have it underway, you're probably not going to be able to meet the deadline sufficiently.
Right. And as soon as we've started getting close to finishing this one, of course, Vanessa asked me to work on another one with her. So we're going to do one for internet and higher ed on professional development in online
But
environments.
not systematic reviews there.
Oh, there's not systematic reviews. Okay.
No.
I thought it was a systematic review. Okay.
Nope.
Gotcha. And so do you know when that one's going to be due?
No, I need to get on that.
Okay. So it is a fair bit of work to be, because you're marketing, you're kind of soliciting as well as reviewing and helping to edit and shape things up and selecting and all that. But it's kind of in some ways, it's a fun thing to do. You have to have the time to do it, but you're helping others in the field get published and get their work polished and representative and at the highest quality level. And in this case, we're going to have a proposal sent to AECT. So we're going to have pretty much everybody on in the issue is going to be presenting 3, 4, 5 minutes on their piece, and then have a discussion around it. So it's a way to form a community of scholars, if you will.
Oh, it's great. And actually what I meant about don't think you can just throw something together was don't think you can just throw a systematic review together. I have seen my students try to do it, and I think that people fool themselves a little bit when they think like, well, hey, I don't have to go through the IRB, the data's all right there, it's going to be so easy. It is a lot of work to mine through, to figure out what the search is going to be. So I'm not surprised that Hey Jung talked about that, like kind of figuring out the parameters of the search. It's not like you just know. When I've done systematic reviews, I've sat there and played with the search terms and then gone through and seen what am I getting with the different search terms, and is this what's answering the question, and trying variations on it. That right there is a lot of work. And then you pull all of the literature and you have to go through it, and you have to be detail oriented, and nothing can slip through the cracks. So it is a lot of detail oriented work. Sometimes I think it's actually easier to write the IRB protocol and go out and run a survey with a bunch of people, or go interview 20 people and mine through that.
Also, you have to the data you found, it doesn't necessarily have impact right away, even though you found something that's a little bit interesting. Writing the discussion can be kind of hard when you're taking 50 or 100 or more than that, 200 different studies, and compiling all of them and then trying to make sense of what do all these things say, which is really the most important aspect of this. What are the implications or takeaways from the systematic review that you just did? It forces you to think pretty hard. I know Vanessa had to think about her conclusions in her piece on intersubjectivity, and so did we in our piece on online learning during COVID. What does this mean going forward? So this is a little slide that Florence Martin and Rick West, who'll be my guest in 511 on Monday, talking about his open textbook initiative in e-text. What is that? EdTech Books Initiative.
EdTech Books, yeah.
Yeah. So, you have on the one end, systematic reviews and meta-analysis is what we have in these special issues. And then on the other hand, you have conceptual papers and theoretical frameworks of your dissertation and synthesis of the literature and what it says. I'm not, I don't think they're that disparate as what shows up on this continua, but it is one way to think about the different kinds of pieces that you can write and maybe potentially get published. And in the middle, they have integrated or mixed somewhere between a systematic review and just a theoretical framework. Vanessa, you have any comments on this chart?
No.
Okay, I'll move on. So, and then you can go to the handbook or the U.S. Department of Education Clearinghouse and Procedures and Standards Handbook to find out about systematic reviews. If you want to learn more about how to do them and how to review articles and report your findings and so forth. Florence had an example in hers of what are the search terms that you might do in an article about online learning or online learning programs and so forth to search the data that are out there, and a process. This is using the Prisma mechanism to screen out articles and look for duplicates or things that are not within your search parameters, and exclude those. And it's a gradually distilling process to actually finally coming up with a set of articles that you actually want to look at within your review. So you have the initial identification of the pile of articles that could qualify, and you screen them out based on your respective eligibility criteria to finally get down to the few dozen or few hundred articles that will apply from the thousands and thousands and thousands out there in general that might talk about mobile learning, or might talk about MOOCs, or might talk about social media. Vanessa, I'm sure you've got a few comments to make there.
Actually, what I wanted to point out was that, so just the structural part of doing these diagrams, I went to the Prisma website and it says that it's down for revisions. So, I mean, I could share the link, but it's not going to get you anything right now.
Well, do put the link in the
want me to
chat.
put
just
the
so they
link
have.
in?
Yeah, please. Yeah.
Okay, I was kind of frustrated when I got there and I was like, really? Yeah, all right, it says the site is currently undergoing maintenance, but the diagrams that you see here, I'm looking at the one that's there on the right side with the blue sideways stuff. That's like straight up from there. They've got templates that you can download so that you're just plunking your own data straight into those, and they've really talked through that whole process. All of the boxes that are sitting on there are not necessarily ones that will pertain to your particular review. So you always have to, check yourself and see what you're doing. And sometimes there are questions based on how many, how you want to tell people about your method, your process. And of course, it needs to be as detailed as possible. The idea is that people are going to be able to replicate it. I will say not necessarily to be able to replicate it with perfection, because even then some of the stuff that we say, like I did a search in ProQuest for such and such thing between these years, and my ProQuest and your ProQuest may actually be different because our libraries, this is what some of those, like, go talk to your librarian if you're doing systematic reviews. Although even then, not all librarians are way up on all this. Like, they know the databases better than we do, but they don't always know what that means for something like a systematic review. But the intersubjectivity review, the person I was collaborating with, we were doing searches. We were on a Zoom at the same time, and we have different institutions, and we were doing the same exact searches and getting different hits. So you always have to be aware of that. And then, hey, but how are you going to communicate that to other people when you write it up as your method? Because that precision is really important.
And so also there's a code book involved in, so people can replicate and look at if they ask for it. And that's discussed, it will be discussed in Florence's book, all these different procedures and so forth. I have a study, not of a systematic review, I have one of those too. In fact, our article that's coming out in Online Learning Journal tomorrow or the next day or whenever is a systematic review of the research during COVID-19. I have a paper that is a meta-analysis. So meta-analysis is a little different in there. You're finding those articles, in effect, distilling down, but then you're looking at the effect size, the impact of those articles, and looking at, the average effect size of the research in a discipline or an area, specific areas, so that you have something to write home about. In particular, for instance, when I was going to graduate school, reciprocal teaching was everyone was highlighting reciprocal teaching, which is where the students become the teacher. They take over in terms of a reading and structure to summarize, to predict text, to clarify. They're doing all those metacognitive things, but it's a really complex method. It's a kitchen sink approach. And so it's really important to find out, if you delete one of those components of the method, is it still effective? Does it still work? If you don't have volunteer teachers, or if you don't model on the front end, or if you don't include elaboration at the very end, or explanation, or whatever component thereof. And in reciprocal teaching, they found, if they do eliminate one or two components, it doesn't work so well. And so you can find that out by looking at the effect size of different studies, or doing systematic reviews. You can find that out too. But we looked at scaffolded instruction. Some I'm a neo-Vygotskian, and so I believe in scaffolded instruction and the importance thereof. And we got published in what's called IRADL, International Review of Research on Open and Distributed Learning. It used to be distance learning. They changed it to distributed. It's a really important journal because it's open access and it's SSCI, Social Science Citation Index. So it's considered to be of higher tier out there. And as I said, it's open access. So it often gets quite a bit of hits. They've changed the acceptance policy at IRADL. They only look for those studies that actually look at learning now. They don't just they don't accept anything in the field of open and distributed learning anymore, and they reject quite a few at desk. They desk reject if it's not looking at learning. What did one of mine recently? In fact, I disagreed with them, but okay. So we didn't have that many articles that we distilled down to in terms of looking at scaffolding effects for online learning, and those scaffolding really is part of Jerome Bruner's research in the late 60s and early 70s. He was working with a guy named David Wood, and I had a chance to meet David Wood in Iceland, of all places. And there's a great story about me presenting before David Wood and then him after me, because he was traditional European lecture, and I was dressed as Mickey Mouse during my presentation. I had a 3-part skit in different costumes. It was really kind of a bizarre contrast between the two of us. We had about 1/10 of the country of Iceland in the room because there were 1,000 people or something like that. But anyways, David Wood has popularized the different notions of scaffolded instruction and the impact thereof, because I think it might have been his dissertation back in the day when he was studying with Jerome Bruner, the famous educational psychologist that you may have heard of, who died last year at age 100, 101. And so our current research was interested in the scaffolding effects, fast forward 30 years later, in online learning environments, right? Or 40 years later. So scaffolding works in face-to-face environments, doesn't work in online environments. And so we want to look at the effect of scaffolding on the learning outcomes of students, and to what extent do the effects of scaffolding influence the outcomes based on the purposes and the sources of those scaffolding. Is peer-based scaffolding or teacher-based scaffolding or computer-based scaffolding? What is the source of the scaffolding? Is it metacognitive scaffolding? Is it cognitive scaffolding? Is it affective scaffolding? What and so forth. And so we had 8,271 records to begin with, or identified in the initial search. And after different screening mechanisms, the eligibility process, as you can see, distilled things on the right there down to just 18 studies that provided the data from which one could do a meta-analysis. You need to have the effect sizes reported in the studies, or you can't include them. And so, as I said, on the left-hand side there, you've got different types of moderating independent, dependent variables, depending upon whether something was looking at cognitive, metacognitive, or affective components of the scaffolding process. And of course, we're also looking at different disciplines. There's a difference between language education, which are more modest in nature in terms of the results, and the science education and computer science, which had more significant impacts of the scaffolding. So that's important. That's something to write home about anyhow. And so there are differences, as I said, in the conceptual, metacognitive, strategic, and procedural kinds of scaffolding. The purpose behind the scaffolding did matter, and metacognitive was the most important, as Vanessa would expect, and that's what in turn happened. And so, there was a significant effect size, so we had a hurrah right away. We had a celebration right away because overall the scaffolding. Dr. Tom Brush, who's in IST department, studies scaffolded environments. That's one of his main areas of interest. In fact, it was one of my areas before, in the old days, in the 90s. So scaffolding produced learning outcomes of a higher level than those without scaffolding. And the cognitive domain, I misspoke. Cognitive domain was we had more learning outcomes. No, I didn't misspeak. We had more studies that looked at the cognitive domain, somewhat less looked at the metacognitive and affective domains, but it was still the metacognitive scaffolding that had the biggest impact. Okay, as you can see in here, the types of scaffolding taking place in those environments, the sources of the scaffolding. You can see that computer-based scaffolding was the highest, and then instructor, and then peer-based. The effect size of metacognitive was higher, and then procedural, then conceptual, then strategic. So we confirm the importance of scaffolding. As I mentioned earlier, some issue is that, you know, most of these studies were in higher ed environments. So we need to think about what happens in K-12 kinds of environments and maybe corporate training environments and other kinds of environments. That's a huge limitation thereof. And again, there could be designs for my dissertation was on metacognitive scaffolding, giving kids generative and evaluative prompts when they wrote. And so I was doing computer-based scaffolding back in the day. So a variety of studies, including the review, indicate that educators are commonly embedding scaffolding support for learners across many disciplines and many age groups, which is important too. We had widely diverse in terms of the content areas and the age groups of the participants in these studies. Simply put, scaffolding instruction is beneficial, and benefits seem to increase as learners get older, although we didn't really have many studies looking at elderly learners or those in the, you know, the outer portions of their life, I guess. A limited number of studies were, you know, 24 studies, which isn't a lot, you know, so that's a limitation here. And the search setting is only 2010 to 2019, so we have limited limitations there. Future studies might look at, you know, other cultures, in other languages besides English. We might look at blended environments, not just online, you know, fully online environments. We might take a look at, you know, the language and literature area, which had the most adoption of scaffolding, but they had smaller effect sizes in the language and literature area than in computer science and communications and education field. So, you know, we need to look at, we provide some guidance into where the research needs to go. How is scaffolding actually implemented in different disciplines? How is it different in how it's implemented across these disciplines? And can we develop guidelines that could help other instructors do that? This is Florence Martin's book that she's working on right now with Sage. I helped her get the contract with Sage, or connected to the people at Sage. And she's, I'm sure, going to have this thing done rather quickly because she's a fast writer. And I recommend you get this book if you're interested in systematic reviews of the research, because it will answer all your questions. So I will stop there and say, Vanessa, did you want to show anything of your research on systematic reviews and call up some slides and show anything and share some things briefly with us?
I didn't pull anything together from that, but I would just say that you know, my experience of doing systematic reviews has really come from the work that I've done with my empirical research, and that the two have informed each other. In fact, it's often been that while I have been in the process of doing the literature review for an empirical study, and I have been building the conceptual framework for that empirical study, that, you know, like as I'm digging and not finding something that feels definitive in an area, or starting to feel like there are holes that are in an area, that's the type of thing that leads me to want to go back into the literature and do a systematic review to see what is there and what is not there, and to synthesize what we've learned about it. Because if I'm looking at it, just like, wow, this is all really dispersed, or you know, back to the whole red wine is going to make you live 5 years longer, or it's going to kill you 5 years sooner. What is it? Clearly, we have a need to go through it and synthesize it. And that's where the value is. So if this is the kind of work that you think you want to do, I would advise you to, you know, look carefully for those kinds of questions.
Yeah, I thought you were going to say if you have a need for a glass of red wine, which I'm sure many of us do.
That comes with dinner, which is next.
You know, Vanessa needs to go to dinner, but please, do we have any questions in the Jamboard, Sunmei? Do you see anything there, or does Sunmei?
I can't see anything.
Okay. Does anyone want to ask a follow-up question of Vanessa? Was that helpful in learning about systematic reviews, at least some cursory overview thereof? We'll start with you. Any comments before you go?
This is definitely very helpful. I feel like I get more information on what should I revise, even though I don't need to be perfect at review of my literature review. But those are really great tips. Thank you.
Tina?
Yeah, I think it was super helpful and kind of let the pressure off a little bit, I think.
And next week, remember, it's a continuation because Merve will talk about how to form your research questions and how to do a literature review. And we have Turan Wong a few weeks after that, who'll be giving us 10 tips on defending your dissertation and 10 tips for collecting data and communicating with your advisor, which I've kind of talked about both those topics, communicating with your advisor or your advisory team and what data exists out there. But Turan will do a great job. She always does. Barbara.
Yeah, it was interesting to hear. I know I've come across articles that have done the systematic reviews, and I've always wondered how they decide from the 700 articles that they found that there were only 20 they ended up looking at. So to kind of see that thought process written out is helpful with that, and to know that that's not the route that we need to be going right now. That's a future thing if you want to do that. So.
No, but actually, you know what's going to help you? I don't know why we didn't say this earlier. What's going to help you all as you're doing the literature right now is actually take your topics and search for systematic reviews on your topics.
Yeah.
Look for what
Yeah, I
somebody
have
else
come
has
across
synthesized on
a
it.
few of those, not within my discipline, but I found some within nursing for what I'm looking at, and I've pulled those to see what they have. So.
Vanessa, you want to finish that thought?
Oh, no, just saying they're very useful when you're doing your literature review for your empirical study. And one of the things that you get is like the power of citing the systematic review is that you're citing the synthetic viewpoint. So if you felt like you're a little bit out there when you've got, I'm studying, it doesn't really matter what I'm studying, right? I'm studying cans of water. And I know it's a ridiculous topic, but if I'm reading all of these individual studies, then I've got Smith 2007 studied cans of water and found that the grapefruit ones from Whole Foods have a grapefruit on the front of them. And Jones 2008 studied cans of water and found that the empty blue ones from LaCroix are plain. I think and it's like you can see how somebody can make this rambling literature review coming from all of that. But perhaps there's the systematic review that's already been done that says that cans of water have been found to have descriptive labels on the front of them, a systematic review. And you be sure you state that in your literature review. A systematic review found that, and bring in that synthetic finding. Then suddenly you are relieved of citing this whole other patchwork of all of these pieces, because the synthetic review kind of trumps all of those.
You can see why we no longer do research together, because I'd be studying cans of beer.
I've got a pretty serious body count from today sitting down here on my desk.
Heijang needs a beer or a wine or something. Heijang?
Yeah, thank you, Vanessa. It was very, very useful and helpful. I learned a lot from you about literature review, especially systematic literature review. Yeah, I really appreciate your thoughts and insights.
Paula, you didn't have a question to begin with. Has any percolated up?
Hi, thank you very much for your contribution. I learned a bit about transformative research, I would call it, and its turning points, knowing your real why of doing the systematic review and essentially putting the research question first. What bothered me in general, aside currently also studying for quals, preparing my committee question, is the theoretical framework because it appeared on that continuum. Also, when do you know when to stop? What is the average number? I initially had 5, but I'm going down a loophole and it's at 7 now, and I think I need to stop.
5 or
7 and
7
5 what?
Theories. For the
Oh, that's way
theoretical
too
framework.
many. Way too many theories.
Yeah.
Mhm.
You may find the need to discuss some of them in general, like in a framing, but to guide an actual study, you need less than that. You want to streamline it. Less is more.
Okay, then. Thank you very much.
Sunmei gets the last word.
So actually, I think that everyone already said that I really want it. So thank you so much. And then especially I like systematic literature review. That's because, you know, my background is engineering. So that's my style. Exactly. So thank you so much. And then actually I feel better after listening to your, you know, advice. That's because nowadays it's kind of, I'm experienced burning out, you know, something like that. But actually I try to find some time for myself, and then I try to, you know, focus on my work. Thank you so much.
Yeah, definitely give yourself that gift of time or whatever little treat it is.
Yeah.
You're worth it. You deserve it.
Thank you so much. That's so nice.
Well, Vanessa stayed longer tonight than I promised her, and she needs to go to dinner. So let's give her a round of applause and thank her for coming here tonight. And she'll be at AERA in Chicago in 2 months. And so if anyone's going there, she can attend her sessions and just let her know if you do that you are in this session, so you can introduce yourself that way. And I'm sure we're going to have a meeting sometime during AERA, and you're welcome to join us wherever that. We'll have a lunch or a dinner or something during the days in Chicago. So again, thanks, Vanessa, for jumping in here tonight, and you have a great dinner.
Yeah, thanks for inviting me, and good luck to all of you as you work on your exams and work on your dissertations. It will happen, okay? It's going to happen. And remember, if it was easy, everybody'd be doing it.
Thank you.
All
Thanks.
right.
Thank you.
I
Good
will
night.
stop. I will stop the recording and just right now